From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Open Line.
The impeachment hoax is a continuation of the greatest and most vicious witch hunt in the history of our country, and is causing tremendous anger and division and pain, far greater than most people will ever understand, which is very dangerous for the USA, especially at this very tender time.
Very tender time indeed. That was President Trump earlier today speaking out for the first time in several days. And he's really talking about the question we're going to be talking about tonight. Should he be impeached for a second time? It would be historic. That's never happened before. But that is what is being discussed, obviously, in Congress at this moment. And we are very happy to have with us a professor, a retired law professor from St. Louis University School of Law, joining us via Zoom from Massachusetts, Joel K. Goldstein. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So you've written all kinds of things on the vice presidency, the presidency, and constitutional law. We've seen you on C-SPAN and on all kinds of national and really international outlets. So we're happy to have you on. I want to talk a lot about the vice presidency and the role with the 25th Amendment in a few moments. But just a couple hours ago, the New York Times came out with an article saying that Mitch McConnell is said to be open to the idea of impeachment. The actual headline, McConnell is said to be pleased about impeachment, believing it will make it easier to purge Trump from the Republican Party. Now, that's the article from the New York Times. And so my question to you, you've studied all of this, is just where are we right now? What do you think about where we are right now?
Well, our nation really is in turmoil. I mean, we're on the eve of a presidential inauguration, and we've just had what normally is a ceremonial occasion, the counting of the electoral votes, and yet this time the Capitol was invaded by forces aligned with the president who were intent on and disrupted the count. I mean, as you pointed out, we're on the verge of having a second impeachment of a president. Never happened before. Talk about invoking the 25th Amendment, a historic rupture between President Trump and Vice President Pence. Reportedly, Secretary of State Pompeo's European trip was called off because the nations there said that they had no interest in meeting with him. Representative Liz Cheney, the number 3 Republican, has announced she's going to vote to impeach the president, said that we've never had a president who has so betrayed his oath. So it really is a remarkable situation that we're in right now.
We are 8 days away from the end of his presidency. And really the prevailing argument for those who don't want to impeach, as I understand it, is really what's the point? We're 8 days away. What do you think, I guess, about how unprecedented this is and about that argument going forward? That really there's not time, we're so close, and kind of what's the point at this point in time?
Well, yeah, I mean, the argument is that you're probably not going to remove him before his term ends anyhow. So what's the point? I guess the response is that first there's the remedy that often isn't used, but for somebody who's convicted on impeachment, there's 2 possible remedies. One is removal from office, and the other, which is not often used, is to prohibit the person from ever holding office again under the United States. So one possibility would be that it would be done to prohibit President Trump from ever holding office again. I think the other aspect is that, yes, it's unprecedented, but it's also unprecedented what we witnessed on Wednesday, a president really imploring his supporters to go to the Capitol using incendiary language And then when the Capitol is broken into violently, when members of his supporters are attacking law enforcement officials, when members of the Congress lives are at risk, refusing really to take any action for several hours, not even willing to call off to make a statement. That's really pretty extraordinary. The president's oath says that he will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Not only did he not do that, not only did he not protect the Congress when it was exercising a constitutional function of counting the electoral votes, he encouraged people to go down there and then refused to defend them when they were under attack.
The New York Times article that led on all of the national broadcasts tonight, and I'm just going to read the first line. Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, has told associates he believes President Trump committed impeachable offenses and that he is pleased that Democrats are moving to impeach him, believing that it will make it easier to purge him from the party, according to people familiar with his thinking. Where do you think that puts things? Now, again, they're not quoting Mitch McConnell. They asked his spokesperson for a quote, and they were directed back to the statement he made on the floor of the Senate after the turmoil on Wednesday. But what do you think this means if McConnell is moving in this direction?
Well, I mean, the other data point that is interesting is that Senator McConnell's wife was in President Trump's cabinet and recently resigned right after these events took place. And so the two together suggest that it wouldn't be surprising if Senator McConnell has had his fill of President Trump and thinks that the party needs to move on and needs to move into a direction of focusing more on government and less on, a focus on this election, and that the party needs to move on from President Trump. That wouldn't be surprising, and that would be consistent with, I think, what some other Republicans in the Senate have been suggesting. Senator Toomey, Senator Murkowski, Senator Sass, among others, who've expressed some real misgiving with the president's conduct.
Your first book, The Modern American Vice Presidency, you're known as kind of a scholar on the vice presidency. And here we are, the vice president is playing a huge role in what is being discussed right now. And as I understand the way things are moving, the House is giving 24 hours for the vice president to evoke the 25th Amendment. The vice president has not indicated an interest in doing that. That is not likely to happen, as I understand the reporting. And so I ask you, as a scholar on the vice presidency, how unusual is this situation we're seeing now between Trump and Pence, and having the House say, give them an ultimatum, saying evoke the 25th Amendment or we do this?
Yeah, well, every aspect of your question takes us into uncharted territory, really, in a way. I mean, once upon a time, presidents and vice presidents didn't get along. Under the original Constitution, the vice president was the runner-up for president. So they ran really, in effect, against each other. Even when that system was changed in 1804, for most of our history, party leaders, not the presidential nominee, chose the running mate. So oftentimes, presidents and vice presidents had disagreements. But really, beginning around 1940, the president started choosing the running mate. Beginning with President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, the vice president really moved into the executive branch. And beginning with the Carter-Mondale term, the vice president really moved into the White House and became part of the president's inner circle. And that's been the model that's been followed for more than 40 years. And what's so striking about this rupture between President Trump and Vice President Pence is that of the 7 administrations that we've had, beginning with Carter and Mondale, 3 Democratic, 4 Republican, the presidents and vice presidents have really gotten along pretty well. Presidents have been very different from each other. Vice presidents have been very different, but they've treated each other with respect and loyalty. And certainly there's been no vice president who's been more loyal, some would say servile, to their president than Mike Pence. On Wednesday, Mike Pence really was charged with performing a very sort of ministerial task, one where he had absolutely no discretion. And the president, after 4 years of Pence working closely with him, really turned on him and called him out to the mob and to others for not basically acting in an unconstitutional way. So that's totally unprecedented, really. The other thing that's really totally unprecedented is the idea of calling on the vice president to invoke Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. It's never been used before. It can be used to remove a president who is mentally unstable, deranged, unconscious by the vice president and a majority of the cabinet, but it requires them to determine that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the presidency. And that doesn't remove the president from office, but it transfers powers to the vice president. That's never been done before, and certainly not under these circumstances. So we really, in both respects, we're living in really an extraordinary theater of events.
Leading up to where we are now, leading up to events on Wednesday, when you saw the president putting that kind of pressure on Vice President Pence, saying essentially he should not allow this election to be certified, saying that he did have discretion. I mean, Vice President Pence has said, I didn't have discretion. But again, we're in uncharted waters. Do you think he did in any way have discretion? Did you kind of see this coming? Was there any question in your mind about what Pence could do? And were you surprised by him kind of not doing what the president wanted him to do?
It was clear in my mind. In fact, several months ago, I wrote an article saying that the vice president has absolutely no discretion in this situation. He certainly doesn't have any discretion to reject electoral votes. And really, none of us would want the vice president to. I mean, President Trump might have wanted Vice President Pence to reject the electoral votes this time, but how many Republicans would have wanted Vice President Al Gore to have rejected Florida's electoral votes in 2001 and declared himself the president? How many would have liked Joe Biden in 2017 to have rejected electoral votes for Mr. Trump and declared Secretary of State Clinton the president? It's totally contrary to our traditions, to our values, to our ideals, the idea that one person, and particularly an interested person, would have this power. If anybody had the power, it was the House and the Senate. But a lot of the power is really governed by law, and it's given to the states. And the Governing Act, the Electoral Count Act of 1887, gives the states really a lot of authority in terms of deciding who the electors are. And in each case, each of the states that were in question, the governors of the state had certified the Biden electors as being those who'd been properly elected. Some instances, those were Democratic governors, some of them were Republican governors, but in each case, they had been certified. So there was no question in my mind that Vice President Pence had no discretion, that he'd be acting unlawfully if he did what the president said. He'd be engaged in a constitutional coup, and I fully expected him to do what he did.
That's fascinating, and it's very interesting to think about. Yeah, Al Gore presiding over the vote that put George W. Bush in, and certainly Biden presided over the vote that put Trump in over Hillary Clinton. So yeah, that would put things on a whole new sort of, that would set a disturbing precedent. And it was clear, you feel like Vice President Pence was not willing to go there.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, and the Republicans in the Senate understood that this wasn't a power that the vice president had. And moreover, they understood that there really was no basis to challenge it. I mean, most of the Republicans, members of the Senate, from Leader McConnell on down, said the election is over. But it was absolutely clear. And in fact, if you go back to 2001, some Democratic members of the House, sort of pleaded with Gore. And they said, look, what the Supreme Court has done is unfair. You won Florida. The count should continue. And Gore said, look, it hurts me more than it hurts you, but the law is the law, and I have no power. And he did absolutely the proper thing. And in fact, Richard Nixon in 1961 presided over his own defeat. And there was a question about Hawaii's electoral votes. They didn't really make a difference, but they were in contest. There was one slate for Nixon, there was another slate for Kennedy. Nixon said, if nobody objects, I think that the judge has ruled that the Kennedy slate is appropriate. Unless there's objection, I think the Kennedy slate should be counted. What's significant about that is at least two things. One is that what Nixon was suggesting is, as a gesture towards national unity, he was suggesting, let's be a good sport, let's give the electoral votes to my opponent, and let's all come together. And number two, Nixon didn't say, this is what we're doing. He's saying, this is what would be, I think, the right thing to do, as long as no member of the Senate, no member of the House objects. So what Nixon was recognizing is that if a single member of the Senate or the House objected, he had no power to do it unilaterally, even when he's giving away votes. So for Pence to have, flipped the election would have been just contrary to all of our constitutional traditions and ideals, and would have been tantamount to a constitutional coup.
A constitutional coup, wow. And one of the things that we've heard, one of the arguments, and initially from the two senators that represent Tennessee, is that there is nothing wrong, inappropriate, unprecedented about challenging electors. They were asking for an audit, as you know. Now, the two senators from Tennessee backed off after the situation that unfolded earlier at the Capitol. But how unusual was these challenges? How unusual are they, in your opinion, having studied this over the course of history? Those challenges, there were some Republicans who were challenging, saying they aren't that unusual. This is nothing, too out of the ordinary. We're just trying to, stand up for voters. And now you hear others saying that was absolutely inappropriate. And so where do you think it stands?
I think it was really pretty inappropriate and pretty unprecedented. Yes, there have been challenges to electors, but for instance, the Constitution says that you can't be an elector if you're a member of the Senate, a member of the House of Representatives, or if you hold a position of honor or trust under the United States. So in the 19th century, there were some situations where people who were United States postmasters were chosen to be electors, or there was an allegation that they were. And there were some challenges that these people were ineligible to be electors. Something like that would be the sort of thing you could make a challenge on. The Constitution says that an elector can't vote for two people from the elector's own state. There was a situation, I think it was in 1872, where there was a possibility that some electors had voted for the same person for president and vice president. And so the electors from that person's state might have voted for the same person for both office and might have violated that. So there was a challenge. There were challenges to electors voting where there was a question as to whether the state had been admitted to the Union or after the Civil War had been readmitted to the Union. But the sort of things that were being raised this time was really beyond what's been done. It really was, another example, in 1969, Edmund Muskie, who was the defeated vice presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket, challenged the fact that an elector who had run as a Nixon elector had ended up voting for George Wallace, who was the third party candidate. And Muskie challenged that on the grounds that the Nixon elector should have been bound to vote for Nixon, not for Wallace. So Muskie was trying to add to his victorious opponent's total, not, overturn the election. The purpose behind this event is not to redo the work of the states. The states were charged with running the election and determining whether it was fair or not. And ultimately, that was the argument that people like Senator Cotton from Arkansas and a number of others made in saying that the actions of Senator Hawley and Cruz in challenging it were inappropriate.
We are speaking with Dr. Joel K. Goldstein. He's a retired law professor with St. Louis University, a highly respected scholar of the vice presidency, presidency, and constitutional law, best known for his work on the vice presidency. We have a bunch of calls. I'm going to take one call, then we're going to go to break, and we'll just start taking calls. So let's just take them in order here. Let's go to Ronnie. Hello, Ronnie.
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead.
Okay. At the first there, we're talking about the Capitol building being overrun by the conservatives, I guess Trump conservatives. I'm trying to figure out, I thought what everybody was going for, not everybody, but there was a big defund the police, hey, get rid of them, we need to, or chop them down, whatever. Can you answer this question? Is that right? Now and I know everybody knows it, defund the police. So we got an issue at the Capitol. The next thing is we had Kenosha, Portland, New York, L.A., all of those cities, burnt pretty much by the side of the ground. And then still we had elected officials that were condoning it, saying, oh, well, they're just protesting. I sat here and watched it on TV, But yet you've got the Capitol building, one incident with conservatives. That's a big, big problem. Next thing, I'm going to make this fast. The media. If anybody says the media ain't censoring what is going out, open your eyes. I've seen it, Facebook. The election, if there was nothing to hide, why didn't we push it on through to the Supreme Court, and go through it? If there's, if Trump's wrong, prove him wrong. If not, help me out. Answer my question.
All right, Ronnie, I want to take your last one. Your other one, whatever. Your last one, though, is I really appreciate you calling in, asking that. If there was nothing wrong, why wouldn't the Supreme Court have taken this case? Ronnie is skeptical, is what I take from that call. And he says, why wasn't there more looked into as far as election fraud? And we have a law professor, constitutional scholar. So answer that question about why didn't the Supreme Court take this case? And for someone who is skeptical about why wasn't it looked into more, walk us through that.
Well, we've never had a presidential election where there has been so much litigation in so many states. And there were more than 60 lawsuits, I think, and all except for one of them, I think, were decided against President Trump's campaign's position. And the decisions weren't made by, just by judges appointed by Democratic presidents or governors. In Pennsylvania, the district judge who ruled in just a devastating opinion against President Trump's campaign was a judge who had strong Republican credentials, and the United States Court of Appeals, which affirmed him in a strong opinion. The opinion was written by a judge who was appointed by President Trump, and the other members of the court had been appointed by Republican presidents. So this idea that the allegations weren't aired, I mean, they had plenty of opportunity to air these allegations, and they were dismissed and rejected is totally unsubstantiated. The Supreme Court didn't find any case that it thought merited its review. The Supreme Court, I mean, there's only been one instance where the Supreme Court has become involved in a presidential election. That was in 2000. But my goodness, I mean, the Supreme Court consists of 6 justices appointed by Republican presidents, 3 of them appointed by President Trump. In addition to, it includes 5 of the most conservative people who've ever served on the Supreme Court. It only takes 4 justices to take a case, and the fact that they didn't take any case, they didn't become involved, is a signal as to what they thought of the merits of the legal issues that the president was raising. So, I mean, this idea that there hasn't been an airing, is simply not true. I mean, in Georgia, it wasn't a liberal Democrat who was running the Georgia election. It was a Trump supporter who was the Secretary of State who was running the election. And that was true in a number of the contested states. I mean, the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, who has gone far towards defending President Trump's positions, said that the Justice Department had found no evidence of actionable fraud. The individual who President Trump had appointed at Homeland Security to oversee the election security said this was the most secure election in our history. So this idea that this election was corrupt or was stolen is simply not borne up by any facts that anybody has come forward with.
So then why are we where we are? I bet Ronnie is not going to be the only caller we have. And our senator, Marsha Blackburn, when she sent out her news release about why she was challenging, said 67% of people believe the election was rigged or there were problems with the election. Look at where we are. You seem almost exasperated as you sit there and say, my goodness, this went to court after court after court, and they found nothing. That there was certainly every opportunity to prove there was a problem, and no problem was found. Yet there is this enormous skepticism. It's the nicest word I can use. So how do we get there?
Well, I mean, it's a terrible problem because our nation, in a way, is in a state that, in many respects, I think perhaps we haven't been in. Except for the Civil War. And, when you think about what happened at the Capitol, I mean, on 9/11, there was concern that the Capitol was a target and that the Capitol was going to be attacked. But nobody ever dreamed that the Capitol was going to be attacked by our own citizens, and that people were going to go in and with guns and with the idea. I mean, it's been suggested, it's being investigated as to whether there was designs of kidnapping people, of killing members of Congress. I mean, this is really unprecedented. We've never had this. So I think that the division, I think, is 2 things. I think that there's a big problem in terms of misinformation. I think that a lot of what is put out in some media is misinformation, and I think it tends to be media that that is far to the left or far to the right. And so I think there's a lot of misinformation that people are getting through social media. I've seen it where people circulated on social media things that are just have been demonstrated to be untrue. I think the other thing is that I think a number of our political leaders, I think, have been irresponsible in the actions that they've taken. I mean, Senator Hawley from Missouri made the comment a number of times that, I've talked to a number of people who are upset about the election. Well, the issue isn't whether people are upset about it. The issue that Senator Hawley ought to be acting upon initially is there merit to the upset? What are really the facts? And I think that in all candor, a lot of the people in Congress understand full well that Biden won fair and square, and that there was no fraud that distorted the outcome. But I think they haven't been responsible in terms of talking truthfully to their constituents. And that's one of the points that some of the Republican senators made during the discussion on Wednesday.
Well, I'm
Senator
glad,
Romney, for one.
Right. I'm glad Ronnie called. Ronnie, I'm glad you were the first call. We have to take a break, and we're going to start just taking tons of calls. Because I think he asked a question that a lot of viewers have. So we're going to take a break. Then I'm just going to start taking calls. So hang in there. We'll be right back after.